Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Well, hello there. This is Zoe Routh, your friendly neighborhood leadership expert, Canadian-Australian one, that is. I work with leaders and teams who are struggling to get traction either in their culture or in their strategy, and I work with them to work better together. So we go from stuck in the mud to smooth sailing. I love our guest today. He is a fellow Canadian. Woohoo! So hopefully you can put up with our funny accents together. His name is Roy Osing, and he is a character. He is an entrepreneur. He is an author. He is a former president and CMO in the dot-com and internet business. I just struggled with that for a second there. He has a huge claim to fame in that he took a startup to $1 billion in turnover. And he sings about it in his book series called Be Different or Be Dead. He has 7 of those books out, and each of the books tackles different elements of that, from how to stand out in the crowd to looking at marketing to his latest one, which is The Audacious, Unheard Ways I Took a Startup to $1 billion in Sales. He has a lot of contrarian principles, which sound very practical in my point of view. He has got a lot to say on holacracy, our theme for this quarter. So that was a wonderful part of the conversation, and it's all coming up now. So without further ado, let's do it. Well, all the way from Vancouver, Canada. Yay, so nice to have a fellow Canuck on the call. Welcome to the show, Roy Osing.
Thank you very much. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Yeah, and I love how I asked you how you were as we got onto the call before we hit record, and you said, any better, it would be illegal, and then you had a long list of adjectives.
Oh, yeah.
So,
immoral, unethical, incorrigible, unbelievable.
There you go.
Audacious.
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 Audacious is a fantastic word. And there's so much I want to discuss with you today. You've got your 7th book out, and it is called Be Different or Be Dead, which is an audacious title in itself, of course. And the subtitle is The Audacious, Unheard Ways I Took a Startup to $1 billion in Sales, which is an amazing story. So we might actually start there. So what is that story, and what is your story? How did you get to do a startup, take it to $1 billion, and write 7 books?
Well, yeah, interesting. Well, first of all, I've had a fairly long life. So, when you got 4 decades to bang away at stuff, chances are you're going to get something right. And I started really, really early. I was in the telecom business when I started working and learned that we weren't ready to take on a competitive world at that time. And so what occurred to me is that we really needed to step away. We had to break away from tradition. And so in a way, breakaway is kind of like part of my persona. And I learned very early that if we were going to be successful, we had to break away from, taking orders to serving customers. We had to break away from engineering domination to marketing focus, those sorts of things. Really, the things that we had to do, I juxtaposed against the traditional ways that business was operating at the time. And most businesses, the same thing. I mean, we had to create a data culture out of a voice world. I mean, that was pretty. I got to tell you, I get goosebumps thinking about this. Right?
What does that even mean? A voice world and creating a data culture out of a voice world. What does that actually mean?
Well, it means in the telecom world, it was all about voice. It was all about long distance service. It was all about local telephone service, which was voice. The data world is completely different. And so it was different in technology, different in culture, different in skill sets. And we basically had to morph from the voice world to the data world in a relatively short period of time because the hordes were coming through the gates, okay? And we just had to get ready for this. And so the breakaway notion became very real for me. We had to break away from the stuff that may have worked till then, but in no way was it going to work for us on a going forward basis. And so I learned that the genesis of Be Different was really breaking away from stuff. And so I started questioning everything. I started being contrarian as opposed to going with the flow. I started looking for ways to be different, not looking for ways to fit in. I started looking for ways to be the only one that does what we did as opposed to be one of many. So, I mean, I guess in a word, the breakaway notion led me to believe in audacious leadership, which was characterized by boldness, courageousness, doing stuff differently, going against the flow, doing crazy things, loving weirdos. Weirdos being not the way you were born, but the things that you choose to do to stand out. All of those sorts of things became very real to me early in my career. And it was basically the start of literally 4 decades of working on this stuff and learning how to differentiate yourself and stand out and win. And we did.
So if I've heard you and understood you correctly, like zigging instead of when everybody else is zagging is the strategy in order to be on the cutting edge of change and to capitalize on market changes. Does it always pay off?
Well, it did for me. We got $1 billion in sales. So I keep going back to that proof point, right? Like a lot of people would say stuff to me like, well, how do you really know that? Didn't you come up with the cut the crap program is something that I created, right? It's within my umbrella of cleanse the inside of an organization. There would be people that would say to me, well, Roy, isn't that just kind of cute? Aren't you really, this is just kind of a marketing gimmick? And I'd smile and say, well, we did take a startup in its early stages to $1 billion in sales. Okay. I'm not for a minute going to suggest that any of those crazy ideas didn't work, because we have proof that they did. You see, people believe that unless it's complicated, it doesn't work. And the reason for that is we've taught people in the academic world and the school system that that's true. If you can't formularize it, it's probably not going to work. Well, the reality is I'm a practitioner. I'm not a theoretician. And I did stuff. And we believed in execution. You can't execute complexity with human beings. It has to be simple. It has to be something that they relate to in their guts. It has to light their fires. Well, you don't do that with complex equations. You do that with simple concepts like kill dumb rules, the things that don't make any sense to customers. Cut the crap out of the organization that gets in your way of actually doing your job. Okay? Those sorts of things became part of my mantra. And we created an organization around that was so alive, I got to tell you, I continue to get goosebumps when I think about this, that people just loved the journey we were on. And the result of that is $1 billion. Nothing else. Simple stuff.
It seems like a quick trajectory from like, let's do something completely different and challenge the way that everything is being done, to then all of a sudden having $1 billion in sales. So let's unpack that. So you've worked at this for a long time. You've written 7 books on the philosophies. If you were talking to one of the leaders that are listening now, and they've got a business in which, let's say it's agricultural business, they're producing sheep for market, say, for example, where would you say that they needed to start if they wanted to be different or be dead?
Well, I guess, first of all, it begins with, you're asking me for a formula, and I just finished saying that there's no formulas for this. So you have to have looking for differences running through your veins to do this. Like, for example, a simple little concept that is part of this for me is create, don't copy. Okay, that says forget about benchmarking, because the reality is benchmarking may improve operations to a degree, efficiency, but it will not improve your strategic position in the marketplace. So people that benchmark everybody under the guise of innovation are being intellectually dishonest with themselves and everybody around them. That notion, okay, I don't know how it applies to the agricultural business. What I do know is don't copy stuff if you're looking for a strategic advantage. You need to create. So now it comes, so how do you create? Well, I've always believed, and it's proven to be true, that one of the major sources of innovation is not knowing anything, because then you have to figure it out. Let me give you an example. I had to create this process called a strategic game plan process, which is to create what typically people think about as a strategy for the organization. Only my model was built to execute. It wasn't built to satisfy the intellect, right? Like the intellect does nothing. It doesn't create anything. ideas don't go anywhere unless they're coupled with execution and the willingness of people to do something about them, right? Occurred to me really early. So I had to build a strategic planning process that enabled that. And I call it execute first, plan second. And there's an ebook on that if you wanted to check it out. The whole premise is to build a game plan by answering 3 questions. And I do this with people, Zoe, in 2 days, okay? And it's really cheap. So this is not your KPMG, SWATs and bots and boom, boom, all that kind of stuff. It says, first of all, how big do you want to be? Okay, where do you want to be in terms of top line revenue 24 months from now? And we start with that question. Why? Because the character of the growth drives the character of the strategy, right? So how big do you want to be? You want to double top line revenues? Do you want to quadruple it? It makes a difference. One strategy will not serve multiple growth objectives. And yet, that's what we do. We create the strategy and then figure out the financials. And until we say we don't like the numbers and we go change the assumptions. So we start off with how big do you want to be? Second question is really simple. Where are you going to get the money from? Who do you want to serve? So ideally, you want to pick a very, very small number of high growth potential customer groups. I don't call them market segments. Markets have no face. Customers have a face. And that's what we need to do. We need to get close to the faces, right? And so we figure that out. And the third one is how are you going to compete and win? That gets at what's your competitive advantage? And I've created this other thing called the only statement. We are the only ones that do what we do. It's powerful. It gets rid of the claptrap out there, Zoe, in the world that talks about we're better, we're best, we're number one, we're market leaders. Those expressions don't mean anything, right? Not only that, you can't hold anybody accountable for achieving them because they're so aspirational. And so the strategy building process was built to yield execution. Okay, so for somebody that wants to start the journey, to get back to your question, you need to start with a crisp strategy that's built to execute, that enables execution, that does not satisfy the left brain in your head. It satisfies your gut, right? And people around you that want to actually join you in the journey. And so we started with that. And we didn't have $1 billion in sales in mind, but we had order of magnitude yearly targets, which in retrospect got us to $1 billion. I still get goosebumps. I mean, it just did, right? And so we then looked around and say, well, what are the things that are getting in the way? So who did we talk to? Did we talk to our bosses? Did we talk to the board? Hell no, they don't know. We talked to frontline people that do the work every day and said, what's preventing you from excelling and exceeding customers' expectations? What's preventing you from dazzling customers? What's preventing you from creating a mind-blowing experience with every customer you touch? And guess what? What did they tell us? They told us about the stupid policies we had that were preventing them from doing it. They talked to us about incompetent managers who were getting in the way with huge egos. They told us all sorts of stuff. I used that as a basis for literally every program that we put in place. Hell, I had a program called Let's Hire for Goosebumps. When have you ever seen that in a textbook? Right? But it's based on a simple premise, right? People that like humans are likely to like customers as well. Would you give me that?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So how do you hire people that like humans? Well, you ask them a story and it goes like this. You say, Zoe, do you like human beings? And I'm interviewing people. I'm interviewing frontline people, the president of the company, okay? So it's intimidating anyways to the person sitting across the table. Do you like humans, Zoe? And you're going to know this is a trick question, but you know what the answer is, right? So you're going to say, yes, Roy, I do. So then what I say is, okay, tell me a story that would prove it, that you love humans. And boom, what comes out is either coldness, in which case I open the door for you and you leave, or you tell me a story that is rich in passion and emotion that gives me goosebumps, and I hire you. It's as simple as that.
That's lovely.
And it never failed me, Zoe, never failed me. Anyways, that's the process.
That's awesome. So it is a process, but it's a simple one, and people can latch onto that. I want to ask you about the scaling effect of going from startup to billion as well. And when you asked the question, what is getting in your way? And they said, incompetent managers with egos. Did that mean that you replaced those individuals, or you had a different way of looking at team management? And the reason I'm asking this, I'm asking through the filter of holacracy, which is the topic for this quarter on the podcast and in our program Amplifiers. And holacracy is about radical democratization of work, if you like, for autonomous teams. So I'm curious about your perspective around that. Did you ditch the managers, or did you just replace the individuals? What did you do?
All of the above. I mean, look, first of all, the business that I actually was asked to lead was not a startup in a traditional sense. In other words, it was in its early stages. Okay, so it wasn't like we just had to start up tools for this thing. We did have the beginning of the data of a data capability and so forth, but very, very small. And so the scaling of it was a function of technology and how quickly we could migrate, right, the competencies from voice centricity, if you will, to the data world. And that did not happen overnight, okay? So I don't want anybody out there to think you can do this overnight. You can't, because there's no silver bullets. It's just like step at a time. I used to say, get me a nano inch worth of progress. Give me an inch fast. That's what we're going to do. We're going to keep getting inches. And before you know it, we're quite a ways along. Now, to your question about teaming, and I didn't know when you wanted to talk about this. I haven't done a whole lot of reading about it until you asked me the question. And now I have a very, very specific opinion on it after reading about it. Here's generally how good execution goes. See, I ground everything, every concept, every opinion that I have has to be rooted in something. It's like, Roy, do you like this television commercial? I would always say, I have no idea. And they'd say, what? You don't have an idea? You're an ex-chief marketing officer. Why wouldn't you have an idea? And I said, very simply, I don't know what you're trying to achieve. Unless I understand the strategic context, I have no opinion. So that forced people then to try and explain to me what the strategy was. And of course, I had a whole bunch of questions about that as well. This thing that you're describing, okay, almost for me is a solution looking for a problem. And let me explain what I mean there. Basically, in my world, strategy drives process, drives structure. Structure of an organization isn't just invented because it satisfies somebody's sort of academic micro whim of what is needed. And I'm serious when I talk this way. And I'm going to talk hard about this because unfortunately, businesses are replete with this kind of tactical, minimalist thinking. Okay? So strategy drives process, drives structure. Okay, so unless somebody can show me why this notion of self-empowered teams that can do whatever they want, literally, is the way I read this, and I've got a huge issue with that, unless somebody can explain to me how that relates to the strategy the organization is trying to serve, then it's just kind of like a curiosity to me. Based on where I come from, it would never work. Never worked, because what we needed was tight execution with what I call line of sight leadership. In other words, everybody had to know their role, Zoe, in the execution of the strategy. This was not a time to say, what do you think? What do you think is an interesting question about perhaps how you achieve what I'm asking you to do, but it is certainly not a question about what should we do, right? It isn't. That time is in the formulation of the strategy. And of course, we did a lot of that. We got a lot of input from people. But when you come to operating that strategy, I can see all sorts of real issues with the whole notion of self-empowered work teams. And let me just give you some. First of all, I think it's extremely internally focused. You spend more time figuring out what you're going to do internally. I mean, Zappos is giving it up, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
For the very reason that people are spending way too much time fussing with it inside, and they're not taking care of customers. Medium is dumping it as well. And so it doesn't surprise me. I mean, logically, if you go strategy drives process, drives structure, you reach a certain structure. If you start out with self-empowered work teams, you're going to be forced to work up the chain to strategy, Zoe, and I don't know where you lead on that. Okay, other than making people feel good and people being motivated, I have no confidence that would ever drive the kind of performance I needed to get to $1 billion in sales.
Do you think, just hypothesizing about this a little bit, so if we take your, strategy drives process, drives structure, do you think it's conceivable that a strategy could drive a process like holacracy, the extreme democratization of self-managed teams, to deliver a structure that's related back? Do you think that's possible? Like, do you think that's...
I don't see that as a process. I'm talking about a business process, moving inputs to outputs, which are deliverables to customers. That's what I see. That's what I mean when I say process. There may be a myriad of structures, right, that you could consider that could serve the same process, that serves the same strategy. What I'm saying is, when it comes to what I understand, this whole issue about multiple self-empowered autonomous work teams, I can't find a business process that would ever serve. Okay, I just can't, because it's not tied to strategy. Behavior of individuals, if you want to succeed, and if bottom line is important, and it is for me, I didn't do this stuff just because it was cool. I did this stuff to drive performance. If I can't tie that level of tactical details to strategy, then I question it. And just so, without spending any more than a few hours this morning over my coffee, thinking about this, I mean, I came up with probably twice as many, what I would say are challenges to the approach, than I did see off the top potential benefits. Like, I do think there are some potential benefits, okay? Flatter organizations yield faster decision making. I get that. The counter is, what are you deciding on? How does that relate to strategy? What are you deciding on? Okay, I got to understand that to then tick the box that says, okay, this team structure is good. The internal piece really bothers me. I see it very, very inward focused about each other. Not saying that's not important, okay, but I need to understand how it serves the strategy of the organization. And for people who have now got this in, leaders who have this in their organization, you need to figure that out. You need to go audit this and be confident that you're delivering value to the owners of your business through this way you structured the organization. I see other potential benefits about, like, sort of depth and cross training of people, right, to yield a broader set of skills, et cetera, et cetera. I think that has a potential of benefits. I also see divisiveness, by the way, a huge potential. Okay, when you got 30 teams running around, don't you sit there and tell me they're not going to compete with one another. And it's simply another definition of silo mentality. You know, the hierarchy has got silos, and people will always criticize that because you got business units competing with each other and blah, 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 right? This is no different. Now you got 30 self-empowered work teams competing with one another. And the potential for driving dysfunction is huge.
Each of those circles goes to a governing circle. So there is a type of hierarchy in there. So there's representation. From my understanding of the way that it works is that there's representation from each of the work circles into a larger governing circle. So there is cross-fertilization. And there's a strict constitution for holacracy about it's actually a very strict process in the team decision-making. Like, it's not organic at all in some ways. And each team is to identify tensions between the goal and what's getting in the way of the goal. So some of the principles that you talk about apply there. It's just how they actually run it.
Well, the devil's in the details when it comes to execution. The devil is in the details. Absolutely. And just hearing you speak, I just think that's another definition of bureaucracy, because what people are doing is inventing things to try and make it work, as opposed to answering the question, how does it serve the strategy of the organization better than its alternatives? See, I haven't heard that argument. I have not heard that argument. And so for me, I would never have used it. It wouldn't have worked for me, particularly in a startup where to execute pristinely, you had to, first of all, get people on board, satisfy them from that perspective, enable them, and ask them how it's going. I mean, this is where my concept that I coined was, you remember Tom Peters' old concept called managing by wandering around, right? You're probably not old enough to know that, but
yep.
Yeah. So I said to myself, that's not good enough, because wandering around is kind of like a meandering process, right? I look at what I call leadership by serving around, which is all about strategic wandering, asking, how can I help? And now, why would you do that? And what is the source of questions? Well, the source of questions is how can I execute my game plan better? How can I do that? And so that's where the source, it's not, well, how's it going today? Are people listening to you? How do you feel? No, it's not that. It's give me 3 things that are preventing you from executing the strategy that you've all agreed to. Give me 3 things and I will work my buns off to fix them for you. I will work so hard to do that. And I did. And they believed me and they kept telling me stuff and we kept knocking the barriers down. It was, look, let's face it. If you really get down to the human element of the organization, there's certain things that you can do if you're serious about it to dramatically improve the organization. And it's got nothing to do with big, sexy ideas. It's listening to human beings and accepting what they say is right and serving them. And it's what it is. It's pretty boring. Okay? Leadership is boring. Really successful leaders are boring as hell, Zoe.
Leadership is boring. I'm just writing that down. Oh, there we go.
Good, audacious leaders are boldly boring.
Boldly boring. I'm writing that down too. Audacious leaders.
I'm in trouble. But thank you for leading me down there this morning, by the way, because I really, and I could see where that whole notion would be appealing. Tell you what really interested me is the actual inventor was a 38-year-old who had 0 management experience.
So somebody who was frustrated by their management experience and wanted some autonomy in their workplace.
You can there's all sorts of ways to get autonomy in the workplace without necessarily going this far. To me, if I look at a bell curve, this approach is way over on one side, right? An absolute, stringent hierarchical system is on the other side, but there are other options in between. I empowered most people, in the organization to do things. I did, right? But there was a playground, there was a box to run around in, right? It says, okay, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what you agreed to do. Run around in that. Go ahead. You can't touch these things, but you can touch these things. Okay? If you want to try and convince me that you should touch the things that are outside the box, let's have that conversation and let's get it done right now. Okay, but once we've locked and loaded, run around in the box.
One of the things that you say on your website is, which seems contrarian to what you're talking about now, and I think you probably have to explain it a little bit. It says, please micromanage is one of your dot points. I'm like,
oh.
Tell me about this piece.
So what is the apparent conflict?
Well, the way that you've described your management style or approach is to go talk to people at the coalface saying, what's in your way? What can we do to liberate that? And here's a container of how you can operate in terms of these are your responsibilities. Go for it. Make autonomous, independent decisions. So what is the micromanagement piece about?
Okay, so absolutely I believe in micromanagement. Absolutely I believe in do-it-yourself. Audacious leaders practice diligently do-it-yourself leadership. But here's the difference. Okay, there are some things, absolutely, that can be delegated. Okay, and I would call those routine things, right? And we all know as leaders what they are. But what I've discovered is under the guise of you need to delegate because that's what the textbooks say, people delegate everything. They delegate strategic issues. No leader should ever delegate the things that are germane to the strategy of the organization. The leader owns those things and only they should do them. Let me give you 5 examples. Thank you for asking. The first is communicating the strat plan to the organization. Now, I know a lot of leaders that would dump that to business development and they'd say, okay, VP, BD, go and communicate this to the organization. That's hogwash. Absolute hogwash. Okay. The leader owns it. They need to take care of that. Second thing is execution. I came up with this notion called, real leaders are what I call strategy hawks. Okay, they own the execution of the strategy. Okay, they and only they own it. You can't delegate that to the guys in whatever, right? You just can't do it. You have to own it. And what that led me to do is constantly be in touch with how the operations were going. Is that micromanagement? Yes. Why? because I'm responsible for the performance of the business plan. Nobody else is. So I'm going to do it, right? So you could tell I had long days. Didn't matter. It was fun. Third thing is, I believe that because the customer service element in most businesses is so strong and getting stronger, right? Everybody talks about CX and all this kind of stuff. And it's true. The customer experience is often looked upon now as what is used to differentiate ourselves, right? Okay, so I came up with this notion. I mean, this is like not new for me. This is like 2 decades, at least 2 to 3 decades ago, of the fact that the leader, if this is true, it must mean that how the customer is dealt with is a strategic issue, right? It is not just customer service operations. It's a strategic issue, because if it's not handled well and it goes south on you, you lose business. If it goes well and you dazzle them, you win business and you keep going. The key thing is, what does that customer moment look like? So I think micromanaging leaders need to architect the customer moment. You can write that one down. That's a good one. They need to be, no, I'm serious. I'm
writing it.
They need to be architects of the customer moment. What happens when a customer touches a company? It can be either a human engagement, it can be a website engagement, it can be any of that. The leader needs to own that, because that's how important it is. Now, that's when I get a lot of people going, oh my God, Roy, I don't have the time to do that. I'm so busy making presentations to the board. And I say, okay, just understand what you're choosing to do. You're walking away from what I consider to be a key role of you as a leader, and that is to make sure that your organization, right, accepts, treats well, and keeps every customer you touch, because at the end of the day, that's how shareholders' value goes up, right? And the fifth thing, I guess, that I used to do to micromanage, I love this one. Like, I actually was involved in most frontline interviews. Like, not every one of them, because I had to miss some. I had the odd sick day, I guess. But I would be on a panel, and I would take my team, and we would interview people for frontline leadership positions, for frontline positions. And I did that for 2 reasons. First of all, I wanted the candidates to know how important they were to our organization. And secondly, I wanted my management team to understand how to actually do this. So I was modeling for them in a way. And at the end of the day, I wanted them to know who was accountable for this. I mean, because it was so important, another strategic issue. So I would say to you that do-it-yourself leadership is based on making sure that leaders do the strategic things that are required for the organization and not delegate them. Because sooner or later, the more you delegate, the quicker you abdicate. In my world, I saw too many leaders under the guise of delegation really abdicating the role. And so I just dug in. And, the interesting thing is, the people who were in my team, they started practicing that stuff. And of course, that was always my end game, is to change the way leaders did their job. That's all it was. It's all it's ever been. Anyways, I had lots of fun doing it. It was great. Thanks for the law. Look at all you people out there. I want to see you micromanage one thing tomorrow. Go do it. One strategic thing. And don't tell me you don't have a strategic thing you can't micromanage, because I know better.
I think that's one of the biggest issues that leaders complain about, is that they don't have time for the strategic stuff. And it's like, wow, that should be all your time. Yeah.
You know what? That's exactly what they say. It's like I talk to small businesses and they say, well, Roy, we don't have time to develop a strategy. Well, you're so busy working in your business, you don't have time to work on your business. And leaders that say that don't want to do it, Zoe. That's it. They shouldn't be in the roles that they are. They're not accepting their real job. They don't know what leadership is. Leadership is getting messy, and I've written a lot about this. Check my blog out. I mean, if your hands aren't dirty as a leader, you're not doing your job. There's a whole pile of stuff behind that that's really fun to mess around with.
Well, it's an interesting tension that you propose, right? So being across all the frontline issues and being immersed in that and holding the micromanagement of a strategy they seem like competitive tensions in some ways. And yet the way that you describe it is, if you're at the front line, liberating people from the things that are getting in their way, that is actually serving the strategy. So
absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. It's all about execution. Like, if you were to ask me, like, what are the key elements of audacious leadership? The first piece I would say, which we've talked a lot about right now, is be different. How do you do that? Well, it's all about branding and the only statement that I mentioned. The second element is execution. If you can't execute, I don't even want to talk about it, right? You're done if you can't execute. Like, regardless how pristine and pretty and how much it follows, promulgated academic principle, it doesn't matter. And so most of what you and I have just talked about today is about the things that leaders need to do to execute better. I mean, one of the reasons it's a strategic advantage is because most organizations don't do it very well because they don't spend enough time on it. And so the other pieces get to things like serve. So if you got be different, you got execute, you got serve. So we talked about that. Third element and the fourth element of audacious leadership is absolutely do it yourself. So be different, execute, serve, and do it yourself. Those four principles, Zoe, have served me so well for so long. And you know what? I just finally got to understand that those were the four elements this year. I mean, that's how long I've been kicking this stuff around, trying to figure out what's the best way to communicate this. And it allows a framework within which that I can talk about all sorts of examples and so on and so forth, and keeps it into a kind of a bite-sized chunk, which is typically the way most people enjoy receiving it. So
that's right. They can only handle a few bites at a time.
For sure.
I want to ask your comments about how you feel most organizations are mediocre, and why is that so?
Well, it's because those four principles that I just mentioned, if I were to rate organizations in terms of are they different, I'd probably give them a 2 because they don't know how to differentiate themselves. I mean, go Google competitive claims, right? And look what they say. They all use the words better, best. Now, but let me give you an example. So here's a coffee company, right, that say that they offer the best coffee and espresso drinks for consumers who want premium ingredients and perfection every time. That's actually a competitive claim by a very famous coffee company. I'm not saying they're not successful. What I'm saying is it's claptrap. Using words like comparatives, like don't help the consumer. They do not. They don't facilitate separating that company from their competitors. And that's what Be Different is all about. That's why I invented the only statement, because, you're either only or you're not. And the other part of this is that, like, just think about how many aspirations are used when you look at a company. And I guarantee after this conversation, you will see them and you will see exactly what I mean. People, they declare not specifics, they declare aspirations. For example, this particular company, that they say we're in business to save our home planet. Another one says we're in business to inspire humanity, both in the air and on the ground. Now, I'm not saying that having dreams are not important, okay? But to actually say that that's how they are unique in the marketplace is dishonest. First of all, you don't know what it means. Secondly, you can't hold anybody accountable to that. And the other day it occurred to me that that's probably why they do it. It obfuscates the need to hold people accountable. And so in the face of claptrap and aspirations, the use of Be Different and the only statement allows people to come up with something that clarifies their strategic position. I mean, when you say, we are the only ones that, you get pretty specific. You can't say we're the only ones that are the best. Doesn't work. You can't say we're the only ones that save our planet. No, I mean, everybody and their puppy can say that and are saying that, right? And so the only statement is my tool, my way of getting people to be really, really specific. Let me give you an example of an only statement. Where is it? That I'm now working with a business association in North Delta, which is close to Vancouver, right? And thank God these guys are great because they're all over the only statement and Be Different. But this is what it reads. The North Delta Business Association is the only team that, one, links you to other businesses, two, connects you with experienced and knowledgeable people to help you grow your business, three, constantly challenges you to do things differently. Now, that's their only statement. And so what we do is we take that and we unpack each statement into specifics. What do we mean by we link you to other businesses, so that people can see specifically, at the ground level, what it is we mean by that, and they can judge whether or not we're going to deliver it. And so it's an attempt to just get from the clouds right down to the ground.
It's very tactical in the execution in terms of using that as your differentiator.
Absolutely, it's tactical. Absolutely, because it serves a strategy. Let me give you an example. If the strategy were to provide packaged data-centric solutions to the people in Vancouver, let's say, okay, the only statement that we would come up with would be to address that strategy and the customers that strategy serves and the competitors in the markets where we serve those customers. So it's not this grandiose declaration at the 10,000 foot level. It is very specific. And the reason sales love it, because it turns out to be like an elevator pitch. Somebody will say, well, what do you do? And we'll say, well, we're in the telecom business and we're focusing blah, blah, blah. And we're the only ones that. And people go, what? I mean, it's just amazing, right? Like none of the claptrap, none of the aspirations, cut it down, get specific. And customers love it because it answers the question, why should I do business with you and no one else? That's the question that the only statement answers. That's why it's so powerful. Because let's face it, when you're out looking for somebody to supply you with products and services, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a bit unique, I guess, in the sense that I've been working with this stuff for so long, but I'm always wanting to know, what about the other guy and how are you different? And explain that to me. And I'm disappointed. They're mediocre because they can't explain it, Zoe. They can't explain it. That's what I mean by mediocre.
Now I want to run away and do my only statement now in my own bricks.
I want you to. And you know what? It's so much fun. I've had people sending me their draft only statements on Gmails going, Roy, how about this? Does this work? Wonderful. I'm happy to converse and engage with anybody out there on this stuff. Happy to do it.
Roy, thank you so much. You've definitely challenged my thinking, and I love your contrarian views, be different or be dead, and all the principles that go along with that. If someone wanted to start, like you've got 7 books out, which one is the best starting point do you recommend?
Well, I would say, a couple of points. Depending on what your interests are, you can take a deep dive into any of the 7. For example, the first one started the principles, not a bad place to start. The last one, which is the one coming out in May, is an updated and deeper version of that. So that's close, the end of May. You can wait for that. If you're looking at specifics around execution, there's an ebook called Execute First, Plan Second. If you're interested in how this, we haven't talked about this, but how this whole thing about Be Different or Be Dead applies to individual careers, there's a book called Be Different You. It's an ebook. It applies the same principles to how you can be successful in your career. There's a couple of books I've written on marketing that use the same. It's called Marketing in the Storm. A lot of the same principles, moving away from this concept of mass to going eyeball to eyeball with people. So it really depends. If you go to my website, go to the books page, you'll see the 7 books. You can click on there and get a description of each one and decide where you want to start.
And what is your website so we can tell people?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, bedifferentorbedead.com. And so my books are there. I blog every week. So if you want to get more stuff on the things that you and I have talked about, you can go onto my blog as well as email me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything like this. It's my life. It's my passion. It's what gets my juices going every day.
Well, thank you. It's definitely revved up my juices first thing this morning. Roy, this has been fantastic. You've been an absolute delight. I love your energy, love your principles, and I can't wait to read more about your stuff.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm grateful that you are allowing me to engage with your audience. I really appreciate the opportunity, and seriously, I'm grateful.
Well, I told you he was character. That was so much fun. I really enjoyed talking with Roy. I think he's got some great contrarian perspectives that make a lot of sense to me, actually. So I love his principles of strategy drives process, drives structure, and I think that makes a lot of logical sense. I think this idea of micromanage, but micromanage the right things around strategy is a really important component that leaders need to take seriously. I love the simplicity and straightforwardness of think about the customer experience and help liberate your frontline teams to do that better by removing obstacles to them delivering on that. I love that he thinks that leaders need to be the architect of the customer moment. And I think the only statement is a great contribution to marketing and helping leaders get their organizations focused on what is their point of difference. And I'm going to be working on that for my own business, I assure you. So his 4 principles: be different, execute, serve, and do it yourself, which I love, is fantastic. So I took a lot out of that conversation. I'm going to be looking up his work and be following his blog because he has a lot to say about executing and delivering on your strategy. So I hope you enjoyed that session. It's one of the benefits of being part of Amplifiers, where we dig into the detail of these kinds of concepts like holacracy, what is intentional execution, how can we do it better? And if you want to be part of a diverse group of senior experienced leaders who are really challenging themselves to implement better, to deliver bigger and better results, then join Amplifiers. It is waiting for you. So head over to my website, zoerouth.com, click on programs and click on Amplifiers, and there's all the details there. Or send me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com. If you want to know more, we can have a chat and see if it's right for you where you are right now. We also have an event coming up that you might be of interest. So we always have promotional events around Amplifiers. So feel free to jump on and take a look, see what's coming up on our website. And again, it's at zoerouth.com. Click on programs, find the event tab there. Come and check us out. Check me out, if you like, in a live session here in Canberra or on the interwebs. In the meantime, I look forward to catching up with you, hearing from you, and hearing how these interviews are serving you. In the meantime, I think I just said that. So it's meantime twice. Lead well, live well. Oh, I said it backwards. Oh my goodness. Let's try and close this off a little bit better. In the meantime, live well, lead well. There, I did it.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.